Hi, I'm John Matthews, veteran law enforcement officer, winery owner, and your host for the podcast version of True Crime and Wine. And I'm pleased that you've joined us for this unique podcast where we feature the fascinating world of serial killers while we enjoy award-winning wine. So, why serial killers and wine? Well, the answer is simple. I'm the only winemaker in the world who has captured a serial killer. And no, I didn't use wine. So this is real true crime and great wine. And each episode, myself and Brandy Diamond, the popular podcast host of Texas Wine and True Crime, which you can also hear on Spotify and all of your favorite podcast platforms, will join me. And together, we're going to take you on a journey profiling some of the most interesting and intriguing serial killer cases from around the world, all while enjoying some of our favorite wines. I've got my Casaro wine today. It's our True Crime and Wine Red Blend. And we'll talk about that later. But pour yourself a glass of Killer Cabernet or Murderous Merlot and join us for this podcast version of True Crime and Wine. In this episode, we'll take you on a journey profiling a pair of serial killers. Now, that's extremely rare that two killers work together. But in this case, not only did they work together and they killed together, but they were married to each other, married murderers. So let's welcome Brandy Diamond to the show. And Brandy, I know you're married, but I can't see you and your better half enjoying a nice evening out for dinner and a murder. What do you think about this story we're about to unravel?
Great to be here, as always, with you, profiling and talking about unreal and very rare cases, just like we have here. And no, I haven't been out on a date lately with murder involved, but these two, they were relentless. And you're going to be profiling them. We're going to give some case background, and this is just a wild one.
Well, and Brandy, what is so unusual about this is, now obviously, a pair of killers working together and married, but we're going to find out this was not like most pairs of killers. There was not a dominant one. Right. They were actually co-dominant, and they loved the torture and murder together. Absolutely crazy.
Crazy, unusual. So let's start with a little bit of background in this case. How did these two meet? Who are they? And what are we going to be hearing about them?
Well, we'll get to their names in a second, but this couple, I can't believe I'm saying it. This married couple hunted and killed teenage girls. And those murders occurred in California, Nevada, and Oregon. So it wasn't just in one city or one town or even one state. It was all throughout the Northwest United States. They killed at least 10 victims that we know of between 1978 and 1980. And get this, numerous of their victims were killed in pairs. Again, I like to only feature really unique cases. So you've got, how many items do we have here? That it was a couple, that it was, they were a married couple, that not only did they kill together and were co-dominant, but many of the victims, they also killed in pairs. How difficult is that?
Difficult. It's unusual. It's interesting. Were they better as a pair or better separate? We'll probably get into that. Maybe that was their attraction of who was more dominant. And so were they each wanting one individual? And this is why they paired up and went after these pairs. So, John, you have profiled serial killers. You profiled the serial killer, in Dallas, the eyeball killer. So let's talk about profiling a bit. Let's tell our listeners, because that's why this show is different. You have profiled in the past. We're profiling these serial killers. So what do we know about them?
Yeah, and so when we talk about profiling, and the listeners can kind of work along with us in profiling, we usually profile a couple different areas. The crime scene. The crime scene is very, very important to us because we want to know if it's an organized crime scene or a disorganized crime scene. Did the killer, an organized killer, bring his own weapons to the crime scene? Did he bring his own restraints to the crime scene? Did he plan out the attacks? Did he take souvenirs? Were the wounds consistent throughout? Or was it a disorganized crime scene? Very frenzied attacks, not planned out, very kind of spur of the moment, even though they were out on the hunt. And they didn't bring weapons with them. The restraints and the weapons that they used, they literally found around their victims. So we profile the crime scene. As you know, we also profile victimology. Victimology is very, very important. Who was the victim? What did they look like? Where did they work? What was their occupation? Of course, we always look at sex and race and height and weight and hair and eyes. Victimology gives us a picture. Is this killer looking for a certain type of victim and maybe allow us to intercept him before he kills again? Geographic profiling. Simple. What are the killer's comfort zones? Where is the killer comfortable? Where he picks up his victims, where he dumps his victims, where he kills his victims, all very, very important to us. And then the killer themselves. What is their specific MO? What is their background? How do they kill? What kind of souvenirs do they take? So as folks listen to this podcast and take notes or maybe use the True Crime Profiler's notebook that I wrote, and they can profile along with the podcast and with the show or with their favorite television show. But we're going to be profiling all of those areas just like we do this week.
So I find it interesting with some of the victimology stuff, right? Because sometimes we see the victimology as a constant. And I was thinking exactly what you used, the word intercept. Where are they going? Who are they targeting? Can we put a sting together, right? Can we look up for this person? Where are we looking? So it's so important to do this. And we have so many victims. You know, John, this is something else that stuck out with me. We have a lot of victims in a very short period of time, in my opinion. Maybe you would disagree, but a 2-year period, at least 10 victims that we know about in this case. Yep. So what do you think about that when it comes to profiling? And
they found the victims in very specific locations. And so we're going to get into all of that. But, I mean, you can tell where their comfort zone was, what their comfort zone was, and you can even tell they got better at killing and more violent as they moved along. So let's talk about the first 2 victims. Because again, many times this married couple killed in pairs. And the first victims were September 11th, 1978, 17-year-old Rhonda Schaefer and 16-year-old Kippy Vaught. The teenagers disappeared from a Sacramento shopping mall. Very important because we're going to see shopping malls were their hunting ground. They lured him to a nearby van. And once they got him close, they used a gun to threaten him, grab him, and tie him up. They then drove to Baxter, California, where they repeatedly, both of them, raped the girls throughout the night. They then drove them to a field, hit each of them with a tire iron, and murdered each girl by shooting them in the head with a .25 caliber gun. Now, Kippy didn't die easily, and the killers really freaked out, and in a fit of rage and overkill, shot her 3 more times in the head. So here we have them picking up a pair of young girls, 16 and 17, and luring them to the van. How did they do that?
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking, because usually, it's like, if they're approached outside of the van and then forced in because they do have a gun, but they're lured in, which is different, and you have a pair of them, and it's not like these are, and they will get younger. We'll talk about these victims because they do get a bit younger, but a 16 and 17-year-old at a shopping mall. Are there eyewitnesses? There's a lot of people around in these places. So this is a very bold way to take someone.
And what did they use to lure them? Sex, drugs, money? I would bet that the female half of this married couple was probably integral in getting those girls out of the shopping mall and out to the parking lot and to the van. And, we tell young ladies and women all the time, never get cold from your group. Right?
That's right.
We've seen that over and over, not just with serial killers, but with all kinds of murders. I mean, you and I could name 50 of them, where a young woman got separated, usually on her own. She went with a guy. The guy was cute. The guy was charming. The guy offered dope. They went to have sex, whatever it was. It doesn't turn out well. Do you think these girls, as a woman, I'm kind of asking you, do you think they felt safer because they were together?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think your guard definitely goes down. You have somebody with you. So you wouldn't expect something to happen to both of you. And I 100% agree with you. We see this in a lot of cases, that the woman perpetrator is the one that gets them comfortable, right? She's a woman. I'm naturally going to feel comfortable. I'm at a shopping public area. And so there's a lot of guards that come down, I think, with just some of those scenarios that you have with just being a girl. But John, I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
Because we talk about our kids and young women getting in the car, right? What is your thought on being lured in and being able, do you tell women if you get in the car, it's more difficult to find you? Right? So how do you handle when you have to talk to your audiences, women in the audience, about avoiding crimes like this, avoiding getting into vans, avoiding that? Do you scream at all costs? Even if they have a weapon? I mean, are you trying to attract the most attention possible?
Oh, yeah.
What can we give our advice out there to our listeners?
I'm telling you, you scream, you fight, you bite. Once you get into that vehicle, your chances of survival go down dramatically. So if you're still in a public area, you're outside, even if they're brandishing a gun, you fight, you run, you bite, you kick, you scream, you do anything you can. How many killers have we seen that not only have a vehicle or, a van or some type of commercial truck, but they've specifically outfitted it? Right? They take the handles out. They put locks inside. They may have areas to chain you down. These are predators on the hunt. So in no way do you ever want to get in that vehicle. That's lesson number one. Great question, Brandy.
Yeah. All right. Unfortunately, we have victim number 3 and number 4 in 1979. Let's hear about them.
Yeah, and I think these killers, we know the killers evolve. And they learned something with each kill. I think they learned that a 16 and 17-year-old healthy female might be harder to kill than they thought. They certainly saw that with one of the victims last time, because now we see them go down in age, and they hunt a 14-year-old Brenda Judd and a 13-year-old Sandra Colley. They abducted them from the Washoe County Fair outside of Reno, Nevada. So now they've gone from California to Nevada. Killer 1 promised them money to distribute flyers on cars' windows in the State Fair parking lot. And then when they went to pick up the flyers, shoved them into the van. They were driven to another jurisdiction. So now we've got 3 jurisdictions that we know of. Repeatedly raped, again, just like the first time, during the drive by the man, and then afterwards by the woman, until they arrived at a location that she selected. Both girls were stripped naked and beat to death with a hammer and shovel. So last time they used a tire iron and a gun. This time they used a hammer and a shovel. And they buried them in a deep grave and their bodies were they weren't found or identified for 20 years. 20 years. It was 1999 before these poor little girls were found and identified.
You know, again, you have a big public place, a fair with lots of people around. Is it selection? Is it the ability to have a mass of people to choose from? Why do you think they're starting in such public areas?
Yeah, it's a huge victim pool, right? You have hundreds, if not thousands of potential victims. And so you're hunting, you're going through the fair, and what are you looking for? Girls that are younger, girls that are smaller, girls that are weaker, girls that are not in a large group, right? They're not going to approach a group of 10, 15, 20 girls, that may be out and going to the fair together and doing rides and all kinds of games. They see two girls that are kind of separated and on their own. And then what do? Hey, do you want to earn some extra money? These are young girls. Do you want to earn some extra money? And again, I know they've got to be thinking, we're together. Mom and Dad always tell us, stay together. We're together. What could possibly happen? But when they brought him out to the van in the parking lot, away from everybody else, it went horribly wrong.
Yeah. And again, they took them into the park. Again, no eyewitnesses that we know of, right? So they're not, and again, your guard goes down. You're at the fair. These two girls are together. They're in a parking lot.
Having fun.
Full of cars. I mean, there's probably people there too. Daylight. I mean, you just don't think these things are going to happen to you. And again, you're in an environment where guards are down.
Yep. And unfortunately, so we did see them get younger. Yep. I think they struggled. And now that they got younger and literally not knowing that the bodies weren't going to be found for 20 years, this had to boost their confidence. They've now got 4 kills under their belt and have gotten away with it. They did it in so many jurisdictions. They're not even under suspicion at this point. Nobody's even looking for them because they're not connecting these crimes.
All right. Well, we have 1980, not long after number 3 and number 4. We have victims number 5 and number 6, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's a pair of 17-year-olds, Stacy Redican and Karen Chipman Twiggs, and little older girls. Maybe offered them money wouldn't work. They offered them marijuana. Free marijuana. We got it out in the van. Just come get it. Where did they go to? Back to their original hunting grounds, that very same mall in Sacramento. They got away with it before, and they felt pretty bold they could get away with it again. Their bodies were not found until July, when a family was having a picnic out in a rural area of a park. So months, May, June, July, almost 4 months before their bodies were found. Both of them had been sexually assaulted multiple times and murdered, and both had been bludgeoned to death with unknown weapons. So from a profiling standpoint, what are we starting to see? What's the pattern here, Brandy?
Well, you have women who can be sexually assaulted, right? Now they're going back to the same location. So you have repeat behaviors of going back, feeling that bold to go back to the scene of your first original crimes. Starting to end their bludgeoning. This is another thing. The weapons are changing. Sometimes they're beaten to death. Sometimes they're shot. So you have different weapons happening. You have different jurisdictions. So gosh, this had to be either maddening for the police and the investigations. Were they on top of this? Were they confused about who was committing these crimes? That's kind of what's going through my head right now.
Well, you got to remember, 3 and 4 weren't found for 20 years. So the police didn't even know a crime had committed. 5 and 6
were they reported missing? Were they missing?
Even if they were reported missing, I mean, you have officers working a missing person case, not
That's
a
true.
murder,
That's true.
right?
Right.
So those are totally, totally different.
That's right.
Even if 5 and 6 were reported missing from the shopping mall, again, they took them to another jurisdiction to kill them and bury them. Their bodies weren't found for months. So at this point, authorities, not only do they not know about most of the murders, but there's no way they could possibly connect them. And you're talking about multiple jurisdictions in multiple states. But we do have some commonalities. 2 people working together, female luring them to the van with money, sex, or drugs. We have them, bringing them into the van, driving them to a different jurisdiction. They always sexually assault them. They always at least try to bludgeon them to death. And if it doesn't work, the backup is what?
Shooting.
A gun.
Yep.
But as far as commonality in crime scenes, really there's not a commonality. We've seen them use a tire iron. That was probably in the van. May have been in there, or put there intentionally. The hammer certainly could have been in there, or they could have been putting it in there intentionally. But to me, I'm leaning towards very organized killers. They've got a plan. They've got a process. They've got specific hunting grounds. They have specific victims, right? Yep. Young females. Their rape is always a part of it, and bludgeoning them to death is always a part of it. So we're seeing some very, very methodical and organized killers at this point.
All right. Well, we unfortunately have victim number 7.
Well, before we get to that, Brandy, let's take a wine break. I know I need a little sip of wine, so let's take a wine break. Now, on each episode of True Crime and Wine, we feature one of our Casaro Winery brands, and it's fitting to share with everyone what I'm enjoying. So today, we have our True Crime and Wine Red Blend, a dry red wine that has garnered a host of international medals and was just named a top Texas wine. Now, this brand of Primitivo and Graciano pairs well with any pizza or pasta dish that you make at home. And of course, there's absolutely no better wine to enjoy while you're listening to your favorite podcast, True Crime and Wine. So, grab a glass of True Crime and Wine, our red blend. As always, you can order it at CasaroWines.com, CASSARO wines.com, and salute.
Okay, John, let's go ahead and discuss, unfortunately, victim number 7.
Yeah, and this one was very unusual, okay? It took place on June 6, 1980, and it was a hitchhiker, Linda Teresa Aguilar. And she was offered a ride and took it. Now, Miss Aguilar was 4 months pregnant at the time she was abducted, and then she was driven to a beach where she was raped and beaten to death with a rock. She was strangled after she was beaten, so again the killer thought he did not do a good job and strangled her after he beat her with the rock. Her body was found buried in a shallow grave outside of Gold Beach, Oregon. So now we've had California, Nevada, and Oregon. But what strikes you as different with this homicide, Brandy?
So she's by herself. And I when we were talking about victim, kind of up to number 6, I thought about hitchhiking, because this is a time where people did hitchhike. There was a little bit more trust of getting in a car with someone, I think, than there is today. It was kind of common. So it's not unusual to see as a hitchhiker. So I'm not surprised by this, but she's by herself. She's pregnant, 4 months. Can they tell Usually, maybe not. I don't know what she looked like. But then I think at some point, John, she had to say, I'm pregnant, right? She's
Right.
probably begging for her life here. And then again, you have the beating, which to me is a lot of anger, a lot of frustration when you're beating something, you're looking at something and a person and they're begging for their life. So there are some differences here. But, again, she's raped just terrible. Just terrible.
Yeah, let me tell you kind of from a law enforcement profiling perspective, what sticks out to me that's different is obviously she was alone, and she was alone in hitchhiking. So I see this as more of a spontaneous crime, a crime of opportunity. Maybe they weren't ready to go hunting yet. Maybe they were going from location to location, but they saw this opportunity, this single female by herself on the road. They knew there were no witnesses. They knew there was no way they could be caught. The girl willingly gets into the van, and then they drive her to a beach. But this time, they didn't use any tools, right? They didn't take anything for the van. So this also shows me that this one murder wasn't planned. It was much more disorganized. They used a rock from the beach to beat her to death and then buried her in a shallow grave. So again, they're bold. They're getting rid of their victims. They know no one saw her being picked up. They think no one saw her murdered, and they just buried her in a shallow grave. So to me, this was a much more spontaneous crime. Now, that also leads me as an investigator to think, why'd they change their MO? Was it simply right time, right opportunity, and take advantage of it? Or are they starting to get sloppy?
Well, crime of opportunity, you have a weapon of opportunity, right? A rock that's probably just sitting nearby, and they have to have a weapon. But you're right. Are they changing for a reason? Did something, are the pairs too risky now? You never know what's going on in their heads with this, but definitely some differences in this victim.
Right. And so in law enforcement, we're trying to piece this together. Now we have another crime totally different from the previous ones. And we're going to see that again in victim number 8, which wasn't very much after victim number 7. July 17th, 1980, 31-year-old Virginia Mokel. She was abducted from a parking lot in a West Sacramento bar. Now, that's significant because remember, the 2 girls 2 times that were abducted from the shopping mall, that was also in Sacramento. So now, are we starting to learn a little bit more about their comfort zone and maybe where they live? Maybe everything starts in Sacramento, then moves to Nevada, then moves to Oregon. We now have 3 crimes that we know about that all originated in Sacramento. But this time it was a little different. They abducted her in a parking lot where she worked as a bartender.
Okay.
That means they had the ability to talk her out of the bar. Maybe she ended her shift. Maybe she was there drinking after a shift. But bartenders are usually pretty street smart, right? If you're a bartender, you've been one for a while, you can usually read people. So again, from a profiling perspective, this is very unique. You see the hitchhiker that was 4 months pregnant, that was out by herself on a road, probably wrong time, wrong place, easy target. Are they getting bolder now? Are they now going after somebody in a bar, a bartender of all people, and talking her outside? They abducted her, they put her in the van, and her skeletal remains weren't found for 3 months later in Clarksburg, California. And she had been beaten and strangled with nylon fishing line. Brandy, I've got a big announcement today. Our true crime lovers have been asking about this for months. And launching this week is our True Crime and Wine store. It's called shoptruecrime.com. That's it. shoptruecrime.com. And it's filled with all of your favorite true crime and wine merchandise, like hoodies, t-shirts, bookmarks, wine tumblers, phone cases, and much more. Yes, shoptruecrime.com is open for business. So visit us online and pick out your favorite merch for yourself or another true crime lover. I actually logged in this morning and bought some pins, some coasters, stickers, and even wine glasses for a few friends. So if you're looking for great true crime and wine keepsakes, go to shoptruecrime.com and check out all of our merchandise.
Another thing I'm thinking is the woman who is the woman perpetrator has to be, to me, very convincing, because you're right. Speaking from being a bartender all through graduate school, I have there's a lot you learn about people. And I remember times people sitting at the bar thinking, well, these are people I definitely would not walk outside with, and these are definitely people I can trust. So you have good instinct, and I think she may have really good instinct, but then you still see her become a victim, which kind of tells me, is the woman in this so convincing and trusting that it's easy for this to be pulled off? And
now look at her age.
Yep.
When we look at victimology, again, it all goes back to profiling. When we look at victimology, the age is now drastically different. We were talking about 17-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 13 and 14-year-olds. This is a 31-year-old.
That's right.
Right? A
Yeah.
seasoned woman, a seasoned bartender, and they were still able to convince her to go outside and get in the van.
Bold. I see them becoming more bold, and I don't know. Does it become so sexually motivated crimes? Right? Are they now wanting older women? Is that changing? That does confuse me a little bit. Not being an investigator, I do. When you're talking about profiling and victimology, why the range in age?
Are they feeling stronger?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe they're more confident. Maybe they're like, wow, we have actually killed from 13 and 14-year-olds to 17-year-olds to 20-year-olds to hitchhiker. Now it's up to 31. So their range is increasing. I think they're emboldened. I think they're cocky. I think they're confident. And I think their perception is they can con anybody to get them in the van. And once they're in that van, you're not coming out alive.
Well, you just said something that made me think also, do they feel less predatorial towards an older woman? Like, oh, I didn't force her in. She willingly came with us. Does it almost make them feel better about themselves and what they're doing? I almost kind of wonder about that too. Whereas like with the younger victims, they had to prey upon them and there was some force. But here you just see someone willing to be a participant in whatever they've got going on and the reason she got in this van.
And is that part of the high they're getting? Mm-hmm. Look, we can convince anybody.
Exactly.
Look how good we are as a married couple. We can convince anybody, and they never know we're going to kill them. They're never getting out of the van alive. And they're, pretty good about hiding the bodies. Their body disposal, whether it's a shallow grave or in brush or whatever, these bodies are not being found for months.
Yeah.
Or in the case of the two girls, 20 years later.
All right, John. Well, they are now back to a pair. So we've got victims number 9 and number 10.
Yeah, and this time they did go back to a pair. So maybe they're bold. They're so bold now. We can get anybody. We can kill anybody. 22-year-old Craig Miller. Whoa!
That's different. A guy. Wow.
Yeah, first time we've seen this. And 21-year-old Mary Elizabeth Stowers. They were standing on the side of a street, and in a brazen move, they were abducted at gunpoint and forced into a car. Totally different. Everything has changed now. Now we see a young man and a young woman on a street in broad daylight, and they pull up and force him into the car at gunpoint. Miller then was forced out of the car, shot, and his body was left near Bass Lake. So they brought him into the vehicle. They took him to Bass Lake. Obviously, neither one of them had any use for Miller.
I
so
just was
now
thinking
I'm
that.
starting to think of, hey, is the female really the one driving this boat here? And it'll turn out that that's what we discover. So Miller was basically collateral damage. They took him and killed him immediately and threw him out. But Stowers, a really pretty 21-year-old, they took to her an apartment where they sexually assaulted her for hours before being taken up to Placer County, where she was murdered and left in a field. So they had their way with her for hours before driving her up to another county and leaving her in a field. So this is totally different. Are they going to a whole new level, or are they totally off the rails?
So I'm thinking to myself, if they had no use for the man, was she? Maybe it was just, let's see if we can take him. Let's see if we can go ahead and take him, get rid of him, and then just have her. So again, I see boldness. I see let's abduct someone that we're not going to take with us. I mean, I think they maybe decide that. I don't think they had any intention of taking him back to the apartment because he's a threat. That you have now a male who can probably fight back a little more. And again, we don't know. I don't really know much about the gentleman yet. We haven't talked about the actual perpetrators in this case yet. But what was he like? Right? Would he have been able to defend himself against Craig Miller? So you have, to me, very boldness. You have them going back to pairs. Now you have, we can take you, but we're just going to get rid of you, and then we're going to basically take her and do what we want. And then you have them taking back to an apartment. So now you have them going back to maybe where they live, which is, again, a bolder move. So, yeah, there's some differences here.
Well, and from a profiling standpoint, one of the things that stands out to me, he wasn't raped, right?
That's right.
He was shot and dumped and disposed of. So, yes, it could be they felt he might have been a threat or a potential threat, so they just immediately kill him and get rid of him. But now I'm leaning towards these crimes are not motivated by the murder, right? Because we always try to figure out, what is that motivation? What is giving those killers that high? Because all killers get a high, and there's all different ways that they get that high. Now I'm thinking I know a lot more about these killers because the murder is not their primary motivation. Their motivation is the sex.
That's right.
And they could have done something with the male. They didn't. So did they both want to be with the female? Did they both enjoy females? They sexually assaulted every single female in this case.
Yeah.
So this actually provides a lot more information. But them getting bold, them kidnapping a couple right off the street, this was the beginning of the end for them.
Okay, John, so let's get into their downfall and arrest.
Yeah, this last attack was so bold, so brazen. In the middle of the day, in the middle of the street, they abduct this couple. Well, a friend of the couple saw the abduction of Miller and Stowers and was quick enough to record their license plate. Then immediately called the police and reported it. So now, for the first time in almost 2 years, the police actually have a lead of a crime and a crime in progress. Officers start looking all over for the car. They put a bolo out that there's been a kidnapping of 2 young people, and they find the car parked in a Western Union parking lot as the couple waited for a money transfer from her mother. Police arrested the couple, and after 18 months, prosecutors were finally able to flip the female, Charlene, and said, listen, we know this probably wasn't you, so if you testify against your husband, you're going to get a reduced sentence. So once again, the preconceived notion is the male is the dominant, but as we're going to learn here, that was not the case.
Which again is so rare. You know, it's just so rare to have a woman in the lead, especially when it comes to the rape, right? And the sexual assaults, which is, again, very unusual for the female to be leading the charge on that. So 18 months. Were they both denying it? Were they both just protecting one another? What took so long with this?
I think they were protecting one another, and the police had it very, very difficult. So they had very little to go on. So let's kind of recap the lack of pre-arrest investigation and evidence that they had. Remember, there was no centralized crime scene or one specific dump location. So it wasn't like the Green River Killer, right, where the bodies were along the Green River. This was spread out over 3 states and multiple counties. There was no centralized lead law enforcement agency. They didn't even know about the other crimes, right? Yeah. As a matter of fact, the police, when they arrested him, only knew about what? The one crime, the kidnapping. That was it. It was a multi-state crime spree. These were very mobile killers. There was a lack of witnesses to any of the crimes except the last one. There was very little physical evidence at any of the dump sites. There was a wide range of victim pool. Teenager, female, adult, male, alone, in pairs. Yeah. So not a specific victimology, and just a wide range of hunting grounds and abduction locations, shopping malls, state fairgrounds, bars, and even heavily trafficked streets. So law enforcement during this time is trying to piece all this together. And you got to remember, kills number 3 and 4, they didn't find those poor girls till 20 years later. So when they're trying to cut a plea deal with the female, they don't have a whole lot to go on, and they're just hoping they can wear her down, so she'll admit to the crimes so they can recover some of these bodies and to charge them.
So, John, why is this case different from most other serial killers? What sticks out to you?
Yeah, it's a totally different MO, really. It's a killing pair. We don't have very many killing pairs, either in the United States or around the world. Serial killers usually work alone. Not only was it a killing pair, it was a couple. And not only was it a couple, they were married to each other. Also, very unusual, they abducted and killed victims in pairs.
Yeah.
Wow. We do not see that very often, that they kill victims 2 at a time. Like you said a second ago, very unusual that there's not a dominant personality. Now, officers are trying to wear down the female because they feel the male is dominant, but I think the evidence is going to show that's not the case. They were co-dominant in this case. And the crimes were really about sexual pleasure and not pleasure gained from the act of murder or any post-mortem acts like sex or cannibalism. They found their high on being able to rape these young people and then take their life. So very, very different than most of the serial killers we see.
And you have to wonder, was she the psychopath who then he convinced him to become a psychopath and a sexual sadist? Are they both just made this way and they're married? And maybe, I mean, it's just so wild to find that you have someone willing to go along with this if there is a lead dominant personality. So, again, how does this happen? So unusual.
What are the chances, right? We always talk about nature and nurture and how it has to be a perfect combination of both to even form one serial killer. So now we see this in two serial killers, and they meet each other and they get married and kill together.
Okay, well, when I saw their pictures, again, never judge a book by its cover because they look like your average neighbors, Charlene and Gerald. So tell us a little bit about them. What do we know about these two?
Well, Charlene Gallego was born October 10th, 1956. Her father was a respected businessman, and she traveled with him on trips. She was a very good student in high school, but turned to alcohol and drugs. She was married twice and had a wild sex life before finding Gerald. She was sexually submissive, but had a dominant personality and strong communication skills. We knew that from the beginning, right? She had to be a good communicator to lure these young ladies into the van. She had, like most serial killers, a lack of empathy for those her husband sexually assaulted in her presence. And even during their dating period, she knew that he was a sociopath long before the murders started. She exhibited strong lesbian desires and welcomed threesomes with other women as she wanted to please her husband. And she enjoyed him having a secret hideaway with sex slaves who would do his bidding. So this is in addition to the murders. Well, she's dating him. She knows that he's a sociopath with no empathy, that is into sex and sex slaves, and she still marries him, and she enjoys watching him in his secret hideaway with his sex slaves that would do whatever he wanted.
So we were right on with sexual sadists. I mean, there was definitely a sexual pleasure. And to me now, this tells me it wasn't enough. The sex slaves, it just wasn't enough. There had to be, the high was no longer there and the satisfaction. They had to go that extra mile to please that in them, right? To satisfy that urge. So kind of surprised, but wow. I mean, sexual sadists already, and really it was an appetite for them before they were even married. So
right, and we know, again, that's why they disposed of Miller. Neither one of them had any use for him. She really liked women, as well as having sex with her husband and other men, but she probably preferred women and probably was the one that chose the victims.
yeah.
All right, let's talk about Gerald Gallego. Now, he was born July 17th, 1946. His mom was a prostitute. Lord, how many times we've seen that. And her boyfriends and clients beat him throughout his childhood. How many times we've seen that? Sexually abused, sexually assaulted, physically abused, physically assaulted. But the apple didn't fall far from the tree. His father, so mother a prostitute, her boyfriends beat him. His father was actually executed for being convicted of murdering 2 policemen. So his father was executed by the state. He was incarcerated at 13 for having sex with a 6-year-old and had multiple warrants over the years for rape, incest, and sodomy. He failed as a spouse, had married numerous women, 7. Wow.
Oh, who has the time, John? Who has the time?
You know. But left them after each one of them ran out of money. He had a daughter. He also sexually abused. We know that he liked rough sex. And when he met Charlene, she also liked rough sex. And they married and soon became a killing team.
I mean, wow. We talked about this, I think, in the last episode. You learn what you live, and the abuse, the sexual appetites, the seeing of the mother sell her body to different people. I mean, this is all just forming his mind over the years and thinking that, I mean, I don't know, John, when you're a teenage, we'll just say a teenager, maybe 13, 14, and somebody has that towards a 6 and 7-year-old, is it because they choose, again, we see this in incest, right? A brother who has touched his sister or a cousin, is it just a natural, because, when kids are little, they touch each other 2, 3 years old, parents like, oh, that's normal, it's okay. But then when does it stop? And when is it supposed to register? Because this guy has been doing it since he was a kid.
Well, he was a predator at 13, sexually assaulting a 6-year-old.
Right.
Yeah, way out of bounds. No excuse for that. He, of course, was assaulted. He was beaten. He was, I'm sure, sexually abused as a child. And we see a large percentage of victims of abuse go on to be abusers. And so we certainly see this with him. But again, all of the signs were there. You talk about if nature had pre-wired him a certain way, nurture with the mother a prostitute, beaten by boyfriends, father executed for double homicide of police officers. This was a bad recipe from the very beginning. Let's go back to profiling just for a second, because I just want to recap the MO, because we were almost all over the place with this, Brandy. They both targeted women in their teens and 20s, and eventually as old as 31. They found pleasure in targeting and abducting them 2 at a time. As we said, very, very rare. They would always abduct them from public places like shopping malls, parking lots, fairs. And Charlene, remember, she was that good communicator. She traveled with her dad. She had great communication skills. We now know she lured him to the van. Gerald would wait there with a handgun, force him inside, where he raped them. Then she raped them before, most of the time, beating them to death. And we do know that the 2 victims who were abducted alone were both strangled to death. So we kind of know that, and that really paints a pictures of the crime before we get to the conviction. Any thoughts?
I think that you have 2 people who are sexual sadists who need satisfaction, and the way they get that high and to be able to accommodate that feeling that they are trying to achieve. They only had to get more bold and more bold, because I think it became boring, right? I think at one point the sex slaves wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to see him with women. It wasn't enough to see her with women. They had actually go and become predators and hunt people, right? So that's the way I look at it. They became hunters for their prey. You have these, and you have, again, a married couple who finds satisfaction in both of this, which is so unusual. And then you have a woman who's leading the pack in this, which is even more unusual. And again, the timeline, John, the short timeline and the boldness of these crimes, snatching them off the street. I mean, thankfully there was an eyewitness to this. I think they would have kept going.
Oh, yeah, definitely. If that witness hadn't thought quickly, wrote the license plate down, and immediately reported to the police, by the time they had gotten that money from Western Union, they would have been in the wind. They would have been in another state hunting another couple. So let's kind of get to their convictions before we wrap up here. In 1984, Gerald was tried for murder in both California and Nevada. That's where they had found victims. The California trial lasted 4 months, and Charlene did testify against him in a plea bargain agreement. He was convicted and sentenced to death both in California and Nevada. You got to remember, his dad was executed by the state for a double murder. Now he's convicted on multiple homicides, and he has death sentences in California and Nevada. Charlene, on the other hand, cut herself a fairly good deal. She spent not quite 13 years in prison. She was released in 1997, but Gerald died in prison in 2002, long before he could be executed. So the police got convictions. Gerald was sentenced to life, but died before it could be carried out. And Charlene was released back into society.
Do we ever know what happened to her?
No, I haven't checked to see what had happened, but I kind of just was putting together the killer's story, kind of in a summary that came out of the court documents. They actually met in Sacramento at a poker club. We were kind of talking. Where did they meet? How did they get together? They were in a poker club, and I think if you're in a poker club, that's kind of a dominant game, right? And having a female in a poker club might have been a little unusual, but they immediately hit it off. Charlene wanted to please Gerald sexually, so she fulfilled her lesbian lifestyle outside of the relationship. She wanted to fulfill Gerald's fantasies and his sex slave, and she would actually drive the van and help him seek out young girls. The two of them, approached young women when they started killing and offered them money, offered them marijuana. And then when the girls agreed, Gerald would pull usually a .25 caliber handgun on them, tie him up in the back of the van. Going back to what we said in the very beginning of the show, do whatever you can. Kick, scream, bite, fight. Do not get in the vehicle. Once in the vehicle, they always drove them to remote locations. Both raped both of the girls, or whoever it was they kidnapped at the time. Both killed them using whatever tools they had at their disposal. So just really, really cruel and brutal murderers. Now, as we put a cork on this edition of the True Crime and Wine podcast, I want to thank, of course, my co-host, Brandy Diamond, for joining me on this journey, and our producer, Lauren Bedsole, back in the Corsicana Command Center, for helping to make this show possible. And we will see you all next week when we present The Game Show Killer, a sociopath that was so charming, he conned his way onto the 1970s hit game show, The Dating Game, even though at that time he had already murdered up to a half dozen women. I'm John Matthews, and thanks for joining us today on True Crime and Wine. Salute.
Cheers.